Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Malts and Meeples and the top 100 games of all time 2024 edition top 10. I'm Petter, and we have 10 games left to go. Don't worry, next week is going to be a little bit different because I did the list is always more than 100 games. In fact, it's always more than 200 games, possibly more than 300 games. I forget the exact total that I did this past year, but next week I'm going to be going through my 200 to 101, so you can see what games made it onto there. And I can tell you already, based off of games that I've played since this list was made, the list should be different again next year. And it's always going to be different. That's the great thing about these lists, is that it is a snapshot in time of how much you love some games. I want to call out again that the list was created using PubMeeple. PubMeeple is a wonderful website that has a ranking engine, and the ranking engine basically does one-to-one comparisons. So if I had Scrabble on one side, Monopoly on the other side, I decide which one of those I find that I like best. And how you define best can be done different ways. I think there's elements of it where it's like, this game's interesting this way. Or there's going to be elements as well where it's just like, this game is one that I want to play again more. And it's kind of using that combination of, this is just like a really cool and interesting game, as well as I want to keep playing this. If I think it's an interesting game but I don't want to keep playing it, it's going to fall down the list. If it's a pretty simple game that I love to play all the time, but it's not that complex, that challenging, it's more of a comfort food game, that also can push it down the list. But enough stalling at this point. You're not here for me to talk about this. You're here to see what makes the list. And I have to fix something here. There we go. Number 10. Number 10 is going to be Aeon's End. This is a cooperative deck building game where everybody is playing as a breach mage. Basically, a mage who can tap into kind of the powers of these breaches to cast spells, things like that. And you're fighting to defend the town of Gravehold, and you're fighting against these giant nemesis. The nemesis, they have all sorts of different abilities. Sometimes you are facing off against one, it may do a lot of fairly basic things. It might just be attack Gravehold for a lot of its actions, and then attack the players for other actions. And maybe it will spawn out a whole bunch of minions, and those will either attack Gravehold or the players. And so you're having to deal with those minions as well as the nemesis. And you're trying to either outlast the nemesis or defeat it. And sometimes it truly is outlast the nemesis because it doesn't really have a health total. There's no number you can shoot for beating it. It's just going to be, you have to survive. You have to deal with everything it's throwing at you. And if you can do that, you win the game. This is a game, too, where there is so much stuff for it. I played on the channel here Aeon's End Legacy, which, by the way, is a great spot to get into the game. When I say Aeon's End, I mean any of the boxes of Aeon's End. I can see sitting right over here, I have Aeon's End The Descent. Up there, I have Aeon's End War Eternal, Aeon's End Legacy, Aeon's End New Age, Aeon's End Outcast, Aeon's End Past and Future, Aeon's End Legacy of Gravehold. Plus, there's a whole bunch of little expansions in there too. And every Nemesis, every Breach Mage, they're all different. And it has, well, the more you get, the more different cards you get too, to build up that market of cards that you're buying from. So there's just, I mean, there's so much content, but it's content that is really replayable, which I love. My number 9 is going to be Role Player Adventures. This is a big campaign game, and if you've watched my previous top 100s, or just, I mean, some of the content that I do on the channel is playing campaign games. I love big epic campaign games, and Role Player Adventures is one of my favorites because it is big, it is epic. There's this great dice manipulation, hand management that you're doing, and it pairs all of that mechanically with this wonderful story that gives you these different choices, and depending on the choices you make, that really does change up the world that you're playing in, and some of the different interactions that you'll have later on in the story as well. I think it is a fun time. It's one that I played 4 players. I do think 4 players is probably a little easy. The scaling bounce is probably the sweet spots at 3 players. But if you want it to be more challenging, 2-player or solo 2-player. And then a little bit easier 4-player, just because you have it tries to balance well, but it's not perfect with it. Not a negative on the game, but just one of those things to be aware of. Because the combat, the dice manipulation, all of that is so much fun to interact with, and it just works really well. Number 8 is going to be Dice Throne. Now, this one, I believe, was number 3 last year, so it's dropped a little bit, but I love Dice Throne. The Dice Throne is a mix and match battle Yahtzee. You can see on this cover there are 6 different characters. Let's see, we have a monk, pyromancer, paladin, shadow thief, barbarian, and moon elf, I believe. And those are 6 of the characters. Then there's another 10 characters kind of in that fantasy setting. There's Marvel characters, 8 of those out thus far, and I'm waiting on another 9, I believe, of those to come. Then there was just another set kickstarted. I believe that was another 4 there, and there's Santa Claus and Krampus as well. So you can mix and match and play any of those together. You can decide which ones you want to face off. And when I say it's battle Yahtzee, I mean that your attacks are going to roll 3 times, and that's going to determine your attack. Like a small straight might be one attack, or 3 of a kind on certain numbers might be a different attack. But there's more than that. It's not just this pure luck fest, because you have your hand of cards, and those cards, you have to spend these combat points, basically your action points, to be able to play them. And they can upgrade your attacks, and so that can change kind of your focus on how you want to roll. Or there are ones that manipulate dice, add extra damage to it, and so you're trying to balance all of this out so you can knock your opponent out faster. I love this as a 2-player head-to-head game. I also think that it is still really fun as a 3-player, 4-player game where you play King of the Hill. King of the Hill basically means that you get a bonus if you attack the person with the most life. So it's never like you just gang up on one person, which for a lot of those more combat-focused games, there is incentive to, like, okay, 2 people knock out 1 person quickly. Dice Throne, King of the Hill, doesn't give you that. You want to attack the person with the most health because of that bonus, and that bonus is just big enough. It's not huge, but it's just big enough that it's basically always worth it unless you can do that final blow to knock somebody else out. But at that point, everybody's probably really low health. And so you're having to worry that if you knock that person out, is the other person who has the most health, are they going to be able to outlast you? So it's always a good question for the game. Though, 2-player, it is faster for sure, but not a ton. My number, I believe this was 8, so number 7 is going to be another one that is not actually published yet. This is supposed to be coming out in 2025. I know Emil Larson, the designer of this, on the Discord and through like the crowdfunding stuff, has said that like they're working on artwork, they're getting the final chapter kind of mapped out, everything like that. But this is going to be another big epic campaign game. It was described as kind of a Mass Effect type of game, and it really does give you some of that feel. This game with a bunch of combat, but then good story, cutscenes, which is really fun to kind of have those cutscenes, those little bits of narrative that are almost all done through dialogue and then just little bits of text of description. But it's mainly to give you that little bit of information to take that next step. Gameplay wise, it does something that I find really fun. You can play out cards, but every card has a cooldown cost. Some of them are 0. So that means you can play it, immediately goes back to your hand. But everything else, you're managing this cooldown track, and you can rest. You can rest and just let it cool down faster, but then you're having to deal with the enemies. You're not dealing with it, so you're with them as fast as you can. And even the enemy system is really good as well. There's 2 different colors of enemy. You have red and yellow enemies, and they activate in turns, basically. So first red, then yellow, red, then yellow, red, then yellow. But if you take out all the yellow ones, that doesn't mean you get a free turn. It doesn't go red, yellow, red, yellow. It just means you're going red, 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 red. And you have to be very aware of that, because it might be that, okay, all the red ones are close to you, but the yellow ones are moving in, and they could flank you. They could cause problems. They might be the worst ones, because you don't have to kill everything. That might be one of the objectives, but it might just be an objective to get out of there. And this is a legacy game, a legacy campaign game. Though I say that with the understanding that it's not as legacy as some games. There are stickers you put on stuff, but you're going to be able to play it multiple times with one box, just because there's enough different characters you can play as in there as well. So you can actually find a playthrough that I did with this with the designer one Saturday a while ago. I think it was around the first time it was on crowdfunding, and then it did successfully fund the second time. And just hearing the updates and understanding the scope of the story, like there's so much story to it, I'm excited for it. And I will, one last thing on this one, just maybe to keep you interested. I believe you can still late pledge it, but search for it on GameFound to see if you can. But every map is not that big. It's just a map that is in a flip book, basically. I think it's going to be in a book, or it's going to be tiles, but you're never putting like 4 tiles together to create this epic map. It's always fairly contained, and I really appreciate that. And so, like I said, you can see me play with the designer on Tabletop Simulator, or I also did a 5-session playthrough of the prototype. And because I played the prototype And the prototype in this case was basically the finished product for the first act, first chapter. I felt good about putting it on the list. I'm sure there might be minor tweaks to it, but the gameplay itself is solidified, and I really enjoy it. This is a game that when it comes in, I'm going to want to find a group to get playing this right away. Next game up, I believe number 6 here, is, well, very different from most of the rest of them in the top 10. Floriferous doesn't have tons of expansions, doesn't have minis, doesn't have a campaign, doesn't have a big box. This is a small open drafting game where you're collecting flowers. And this game just works for me in a couple of different ways, because it does two things that I really appreciate. First, you're drafting, and you're drafting from columns. So if it's a 2-player game, there's 2 flowers and a scoring card. That's your column. And if I take the top flower when I pick, and you take the scoring tile, I will be picking first in the next column. Whoever is highest in the column picks first in the next column. So there's this element of strategy to it where you're figuring out when maybe you want to take that top spot, even though that card isn't as good for you because there's a scoring card or there's a flower that you absolutely need to get to really boost your scoring. And I also like with this game that you score a couple things just naturally. If you get combinations of flowers, you can score. Or if you collect pebbles, they score you points. But the bulk of your scoring comes from drafting those scoring cards. So it's this balancing act of, okay, if I skip that flower gives me 2 points. If I take that scoring card, I can probably get higher than 2 points because of what I'm continuing to draft. But if I take too many scoring cards, I don't have enough flowers to score a ton of points. If I take too many flowers, I don't have that diversity in scoring. And that combination, that idea just works well for me. I love the fact that I pick my scoring, at least for the most part. And that's where, again, that drafting of, I might want to take the top one in the column because there might be that perfect scoring card for me. In particular, sometimes it's like I need that last flower to be able to complete a scoring or to complete one of the flower collection objectives. But either way, this is a small game, but one that's really fun. Then number 5, we have a new one to the list here, Slay the Spire. I played it solo, but I've also played it 2-player, and this game works so well as a multiplayer game. I'm not sure that I play it a ton solo, at least over the video game, but as a multiplayer game where you're bringing in these heroes to climb the spire and deal with the monsters, this idea that I can help deal with the monsters you can help deal with the monsters I have, and everything's scaled down so nicely that it makes it really easy to track. And then you get to those bosses or those elites. You get to the elites and you're like, okay, let's rock this so that we can get, let's see how many of them we can do so we can get these relics. I lost the term relic for a second because we want to get those. We want to get as many relics as possible because those are going to help. But at the same time, then you're taking more damage, and with everything scaled down, taking damage is scary because you get hit twice. You get hit for 2 damage twice. That could be I mean, probably 40% of your health at least, maybe more than that. So you're worried when you're taking damage. And it's just really fun. It has the unlocks for cards that you expect from a game like this. And yeah, it's just one that I want to get back to the table again and play some more. My number 4 is going to be another new one to the list, also another one that I played here on the channel, The Seventh Citadel. Now, I haven't played The Seventh Continent. I did pick up most things for The Seventh Continent, I believe. But The Seventh Citadel is a blast. Sorry, I was looking at it. I was trying to remember how much I had picked up. Seventh Citadel is a blast, and if you watch me play it, what I like about this, and I think will probably like about it a little bit better than The Seventh Continent, is, well, the mechanisms are the same. Well, you're spending cards, and cards are basically your life. Well, you're discarding them to try and succeed at challenges. You have this story that you're playing through. There's some threat that you're having to face off against, and it's kind of a progressive story. I didn't make it all the way to the end, mainly because this is another one of those campaign games that I'd love to, even once a month, have somebody come over, play 2-player, play from like 7 o'clock until 11, get in a couple of scenarios, 3 scenarios maybe even, in a night, and just play through it that way. Because with these story games, well, I love playing them, and I mean, I love playing them solo too. I have a good time with it. I always, especially if the story's good, I'm always just like, but I want to share this story with other people. Even streaming, I still feel like I want to share this story, this decision-making experience with other people at the table. And so Seventh Citadel gives me that really a good story and this sense of exploration as you go, and these different challenges you have to face. And just sometimes you stumble across something, you're like, okay, that lady wants a cauldron. I'm assuming if I get her a cauldron, something's good's gonna happen. But I don't know where one is. I don't know when I'm gonna stumble across one. So we'll figure that out when we get there. Then my number 3 is another big campaign game, Stars of Akarios. Stars of Akarios was one that burst onto the scene for me in 2023. And another one that I've actually streamed gameplay of. But this is a big space campaign game. I mean, when I say big, I mean a box as large as Gloomhaven. Big, with a separate box that has minis, which of course I got because I want minis for my spaceships because the spaceships look cool. But this is a game of space exploration, planetary exploration, and tactical space battles. 2 of those 3 are really strong. The third one, the space exploration, is okay. It's kind of this little bit of something that they wanted to give you some freedom in what you were doing, but you don't necessarily need it. I think it could have been just fine being a slightly more linear story, spending resources without having to add too many extra complications to it. But the other 2 elements, first off, the planetary exploration gives me Seventh Continent-like feel to it. Now, it's dice rolling instead of spending cards for stuff, but you're flipping out new locations as you go, and you really don't know what you're going to stumble across, which I think is a ton of fun and just works really well. Then the space exploration, or not exploration, but the tactical space combat, I just adore. It is this puzzle of using your dice to position your ship to be able to hit the enemy ship, and you're flipping modifiers kind of like in Gloomhaven. You're hoping that you don't mess it up. but there's this really fun tactical element and situation where like the players all kind of go at once. You can technically, I don't think there's a turn order. I think I could spend, say I have 4 dice for my ship. I could spend 2 of those dice, you could spend 3 of your dice, I could spend my other 2, you could spend your last 1, because that might make sense for us to do. And just that complexity of that tactical battle works so well. And you can watch a really interesting playthrough that I did here on the channel, because there's one situation where there's 2 factions. You can ally yourself with either faction or neither faction. But if you ally yourself with neither, then you're an enemy to both. So I allied myself with neither. Wait until everybody was pulled into the middle, because they're going to target the people closest to them, and then pieced out of there. So they fought themselves, I think, down to 1, maybe 2 ships out of like 7 or 8 before I jumped back into the fight to do the finishing blows to those 2. And I wouldn't want that every time, but for a scenario, having that be an option of how to play the game just feels so unique and so fun. And then there were other times where it was an escort mission where it's like, yes, I want to take out enemy ships, stuff like that, but it's a bigger deal for me to make sure that I'm keeping them away from the ship that's being escorted. And again, they're going to target you in certain ways. So I really enjoy this big story-driven game. And another one that I want to get back to, though I'll probably wait until some of the update stuff comes out for it. I didn't have a major issue with any elements of it, but I know that they were trying to clean up a few things with it. Then my number 2 was my number 2 last year as well, I believe. Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Now, I do have Tainted Grail, Rune of Kings as well. I have yet to play that one. One of my campaign groups has basically been Gloomhaven, then we did all of Tainted Grail, then we're doing Frosthaven. And most likely they'd be the ones that I do Rune of Kings with, though. I mean, it's a separate story, so I might do it myself, or I might do it with other folks. But Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon has, I would say, the best story in terms of like best written story for a board game that I have ever experienced. And I just adore how in depth the story is and how immersive it feels to be in this world where there's this weirdness that has twisted the land, really, that was there on the land, that Arthur and the Knights of Old and Merlin found a way to push back. And now it's starting to take over again. The thing that kept it pushed back is failing. It just works really well for a story. And I also like the fact that this game, I know one of the negatives that some people had for it, but for me, an element that I knew was going to be in there because they were very upfront about it in the Kickstarter, was that you're not playing the heroes. You're kind of playing the backups to the heroes. They went out, they disappeared. Now you've been sent out after them to see if you can find them. Plus whatever else might be out there. And that element just works really well. The fact that you're needing to get food, you're needing to keep the men here, which keep the weirdness at bay, lit, and power them up again. It's just a really nice element to the game. And then you get into combat and diplomacy, and they are fascinating puzzles to figure out as you're trying to line up symbols to be able to connect them, do damage, and it works really well. And then I mean, I'm talking about this with the Fall of Avalon, but there's 2 other campaigns in there. The Fall of Avalon's like 15 chapters, something like that, probably about 30 hours, 40 hours of gameplay. And then there's 2 more that are equally as long. And one of them takes place 500 years after, and one of them takes place about 500 years before. And you're still supposed to play them in a particular order because it makes sense. But you can also break that order. You could play it in chronological order too, if you wanted. It just, like, there's going to be different elements to it that you see and explore based off of what you've done previously. And then my number one. My number one has a different picture than it's ever had before. But it's technically the same thing. I have Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion on the list at my number 1 spot. I love this game. I love the tactical combat of trying to manage where you are and go fast enough that you're ahead of the bad guys so that you can deal with them, know where they're going to be. Or sometimes you're like, no, actually, I want to go slower because I want to be able to draw them to me. I don't have something that's good to go out and get them. I want them to come to me. Of course, that can go completely sideways if they decide to go extremely slow. So you're balancing out this card play of playing 2 cards, getting your initiative, and then using a top action from one card, bottom action from the other card to do what you want to do. And you're trying to create these situations that are going to work out for you to be able to deal as much damage, and then hopefully as you flip that modifier you don't get that cancel all the damage, because that sucks sometimes to pull. But at the same time, you could also pull the times 2, and all of that sounds great. And then you think about, with all of them, you have so many different characters. Even in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, there are 4 different characters. And those characters can, well, not in Jaws of the Lion, but in the other 2 games, those characters retire. So you change up the characters that you're playing. You changing up your party composition as you go, and how every character fights is different. What resources they maybe want or elements they want empowered might be completely different than what other characters want. And yeah, you can play a tank one time, you can play a rogue with your next character, or a wizard, or yeah, so many different ones. And I just really enjoy and appreciate that element as well. So there we have my top 100 games, and 10 through 1 here. And thank you, Curtis, for dropping in a comment. Yes, dice throwing is great because you really can play it with everyone. I actually think that while it is a little bit more complex a game, I think there are plenty of gamers who consider themselves to be like gamers that would be like, it's just pure luck. And I would challenge any of them to a game with that, because I think they would potentially be a bit surprised with what that outcome might be. There is an element of luck, but I appreciate that in a game. So, again, thank you everyone for joining with me in all these videos. Like I said, next week I'm going to be doing a video of 200 through 101. Obviously, if I'm going through 100 games, that's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm also not going to be able to spend as much time as I did on these games today and in the past 11 weeks since I took Thanksgiving week off for it. But let me know down in the comment section below what your favorite game is. What is your number one game of all time? Or if you get really ambitious, your top 10. I'd love to hear what games people are playing. And like I said, I already know that there are games that I have played subsequently to this that I will be checking out, or that I'll be putting on the list for next year. So look for the 2025 version to show up sometime, probably around September, late September of next year. And if you want to check out more videos, obviously I mentioned that I do campaign games starting probably not next week, but the week after. Well, probably after the holiday season. On Mondays, I'm going to start doing campaign games, and Wednesdays, still keeping my 9 p.m. Central Time for Wednesdays, I'm going to be doing smaller solo games, top 10 lists, top 5 lists. I'm planning on doing, probably around the holidays, my top 10 games of 2024 as well. So look for that list to come out. I'm excited to make that one because there have been a lot of really fun games this year. And on Fridays at 9 p.m. Central Time, play Baldur's Gate 3 with my wife. So you can check out that stream then. I forgot to mention the time for the Monday streams. Monday streams, I'm going to be trying for 8 p.m. Central Time for that stream. So if 9 p.m. is a little bit late, that one will be a touch earlier. But with that, again, thank you so much. Please give the video a thumbs up. If you enjoy this content, subscribe and click that notification bell. That will let you know when the videos go live. And finally, if you enjoy Marvel as much as I do, though no Marvel games in my top 10, I could see Marvel Zombies making it to my top 10 if I play that one more. But you can check out my podcast around Marvel stuff, 10 Minute Marvel. You can find that here on YouTube or wherever you get your friendly neighborhood podcasts from. But with that, bottoms up.